On June 16, 1775, having learned that the British were planning to send troops from Boston to occupy the hills surrounding the city, about 1,000 colonial men, part of the military under orders from Colonel William Prescott, built fortresses on top of Breed's Hill, overlooking Boston and located on the Charlestown Peninsula. The battle began on June 17, 1775, when around 2,200 British forces, commanded by Major General William Howe and Brigadier General Robert Pigot, landed on the Charlestown Peninsula and then marched to Breed's Hill. The battle was fought not only because the colonists rejected the British monarchy, but because the British troops had been blockaded inside Boston by the American troops since the Siege of Boston, which began on April 19, 1775. The British Army felt that if it could take control of the hills surrounding Boston, they could break the blockade and have complete control of Boston. The colonists found out about the plan accidentally when an unidentified New Hampshire resident happened to learn of it in a conversation with a British officer and later reported it when he returned home to New Hampshire. It is thought to be known why the colonists chose to fight in the battles, but a 91-year-old veteran of Concord was interviewed in 1827 about his experience in the battle, and has a different view than what people may think he fought for. He denied feeling any oppression from the Stamp Act, saying, "I never paid a penny for them." The tea tax didn't distress him either, because as he curtly remarked, "I never drink a drop of the stuff. The boys threw it overboard." When asked if he had been inspired by John Locke's writing on the eternal principles of liberty, the ancient farmer replied, "Never heard of him." Finally, when the curious interviewer asked what he did mean in going to the fight, the crusty veteran responded, "Young man, what we meant in going for those redcoats was this. We always governed ourselves, and we always meant to. They didn't think we should." The men who fought against the British in April of 1775 fought not for the dislike of taxation without representation, but because the British endangered their familiar way of life. The Battle of Bunker Hill was fought on land, with mainly guns until the colonial militia ran out. After the British retreated twice, they came back to fight for the third time. By this time, the militia had expended much of its ammunition. The colonists fired the last of their ammo during their last attack. As Colonel Prescott recalled, their firing became sporadic, then went out like a candle. When their guns were empty, they began throwing rocks, then fought hand to hand with the butts of their muskets as British troops came over the fortress in waves and bayoneting the defenders. After the first two attacks from the British, the battle became up close and personal. A Royal Marine wrote, "Nothing could be more shocking than the carnage that followed the storming of this work. We tumbled over the dead to get at the living, with soldiers stabbing some and dashing out the brains of others." The Marines' words should paint a picture in people's minds of how the battle is not like the 21st century battles, where it is unknown who you are killing. It is up close and firsthand. The Marine describes how everyone is literally stepping over bodies and killing their opposition by hand-to-hand combat. The strategies for the battle for both the colonists and the British were not the best. The colonists had a better strategy coming into the battle than the British, but ended up losing anyway. The Americans were smart to get high ground on Breed's Hill. They were supposed to go to Bunker Hill and fortify there. Whether Prescott ignored orders or was simply ignorant of Charlestown's geography is unknown, but either way, it was useful because Breed's Hill had a shorter peak with a closer perch to the British under siege in Boston. William Prescott formed a good strategy that he told the Americans, which was, "Don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes." This order given by Prescott allowed the Americans to preserve gunfire. Although they preserved ammunition, they ran out once the British took their third strike. The British, not having home turf advantage, could not get a vantage point on the colonists. The British, aggravated, engaged in all-out, full frontal assault. They failed the first two attempts, having to retreat, but finally they outnumbered the colonists and defeated them. After the battle, although the Americans did not take the win, they had a victory of their own. They were able to injure a great number of British and show that if they have the might to do something, despite their chances, they can do it.
Bunker Hill was fought in the earlier stages of the war, where momentum is most needed to be successful. This battle gave the inexperienced colonial forces a huge confidence boost, even though they wound up losing. In a letter from John Burgoyne, a British general, to Lord Stanley, John's nephew, he describes the battle, saying, "If we look to the height, Howe's corps ascending the hill in the face of entrenchments, and in a very disadvantageous ground, was much engaged, and to the left the enemy pouring in fresh troops by thousands over the land." From this letter, it shows a surprise from the British generals, who thought this war was going to be quick and easy. The battle also made the Americans realize that the British troops were not invincible, and as the war went on, this specific battle continued to be looked back on for confidence. This battle will occur in all textbooks since it is the first major battle to begin with, but also because of the degree of importance that it served to be to the militias fighting. Since Bunker Hill occurred so early on in the war, it didn't directly speed up the time frame. It was really just the start of getting everything rolling. George Washington takes control of the Continental Army a month after the battle, and then after that, 3 successful sieges and battles take place from the momentum created from Bunker Hill. The 3 events is the Patriots under Montgomery occupy Montreal in Canada on November 13th. Virginia and North Carolina Patriots rout Loyalist troops and burn Norfolk on December 11th. Colonel Thompson with 1,500 Rangers and militia capture Loyalists at Great Canebrake, South Carolina on December 22nd. After Bunker Hill, the Patriots had an advantage due to the fatality difference, with Britain losing double that the Colonials did, therefore giving the Americans an upper hand for the next battles coming up, even though they technically lost. Losing in the manner that they did was extremely beneficial for the short-term future, as shown in the events happening after Bunker Hill, all being victories for the Americans. This battle turned out to be a learning experience for both groups since it occurred so early in the war. Neither group knew what to expect from the other, and from this battle on, they started getting more of an understanding of what their enemy would bring to the table. After this battle, the British General Howe only conducted attacks from the flanks, never going for a frontal assault due to the inability to break through the frontal lines of the Colonials in this battle. The Americans learned from Bunker Hill to bring in more supplies to each battle as to not be in the same situation as they were in, having to surrender to the enemy due to not having enough ammunition to finish what they started. Overall, the Loyalists learned that this war was not going to be a cakewalk like they thought it was, and is going to be a long, hard-fought war. As said before, the Americans learned overall that they can win, and the well-organized fancy British troops can be beaten. The Colonials after this battle, seeing as they had to use hand-to-hand combat, started getting more muskets with bayonets, and training with them to be able to more efficiently protect themselves if the close-range fighting occurred again.
"2,500 troops. Along with much of Boston, General Burgoyne watched the assault on Breed's Hill.
Now ensued one of the greatest scenes of war that can be conceived. Howe's troops ascending the hill. The roar of cannon, mortars, and musketry made the whole a picture of horror beyond anything that ever came to my lot to be witness to.
The Redcoat charge collapsed. Officers in particular were singled out.
They have appalling officer casualties. Stuff that scares the dickens out of the British command structure, because they have not experienced death rates and serious wound rates among the officer corps like that in a comparable engagement in their living memory.
Bringing up reinforcements, Howe ordered a second attack. And then a third. By now, the rebels were nearly out of powder. In the last charge, some had even fired broken glass, rocks, and nails in place of musket balls. Prescott's men waited until the Redcoats were again in range and spent their last precious rounds. Major Pitcairn, who had led the Redcoats onto Lexington Green just 2 months earlier, went down with 4 shots in him and died in the arms of his son. Defenseless now against British bayonets, Prescott finally ordered his men to retreat.
The dead and wounded lay on every side of us. Their groans were piercing. Our orders were to make the best retreat we could. We set off almost gone with fatigue.